The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 391. A Presence Like No Other. Part 1. A few days ago, Roman Dmitri received a message with blood-stained hands. "My lord, we have succeeded in annihilating the forces Kronos sent to attack Dmitri." At his feet, corpses were strewn everywhere. Roman had been traversing Valhalla for several days and nights, slaughtering all those who blocked his path. The warmth coming off of the corpses was the only proof that they had been living, breathing human beings mere moments ago. Taking the time to answer this call meant whatever pursuers he still had would definitely catch up to him, but Roman wasn't concerned about that at all. What's the situation in Dmitri? The damage is not insignificant. Due to Ares' betrayal and Kronos' teleportation magic, we suffered considerable losses. However, thanks to Captain Jonathan's leadership, we managed to adapt and resolve the situation. After initially repelling the enemy's attack, we sent a battalion out to hunt down the Kronos Empire's forces and eradicate them. In the process, Kevin captured Ares. The person in contact was Chris. After bringing up Ares, he cautiously voiced a question that had been lingering in the back of his mind. "Did you expect Kevin to handle Ares?" It was a surprising enough question that Roman decided to respond honestly. "No. But whoever it ended up being, I was confident that someone like Ares wouldn't be able to bring Dmitri down." A brief moment of silence fell. Chris's emotions seemed to radiate through the telegram, even if he wasn't voicing them. This was bound to be a complicated issue for him. Having known Kevin from his early days and gotten to watch the demon of Dmitri grow, Chris must have been confident in his superiority. There was no doubt that the last two fights between them had demonstrated the stark difference in their power, but Kevin's battle with Ares was now rocking his entire worldview. Ares was powerful. Even Chris was unsure if he could survive a fight against him, let alone walk away victorious. Yet Kevin had defeated such a monster. To Chris, who saw himself as Dmitri's second-in-command, the sight of Kevin appearing before them with Ares in his fist, both covered in blood, had been disconcerting. In that moment, a strange spark caught flame in the back of his mind. If it turned out that Roman had chosen Kevin to handle Ares, Chris's pride would likely have been hurt. But that was their business, so much like in his past life, Roman chose not to address it. Those who followed Jungheek Beck had competed with each other for recognition, and this desire became a driving force for mutual improvement. That was why he didn't give more than a vague answer. In the first place, Chris and Kevin weren't the only people Roman was putting his trust in this war. The fact was that he was confident that Dmitri as a whole was stronger today than it used to be, as evidenced by its successfully repelling Kronos' assault under Captain Jonathan's leadership. To build a powerful nation, you couldn't rely on single, talented individuals to solve your problems. No matter when or where a problem arose, those present should always have the skills they needed to solve it. This was Roman's utopia, and under his vision, Dmitri had made significant progress. Of course, he trusted Chris and Kevin more than most, but even if Ares had managed to avoid their detection and infiltrate Dmitri, Roman was sure he still wouldn't have achieved his goals. He would have been discovered before reaching the castle and either succumbed to human wave tactics, or had his head blown off by Fernando and the royal guard long before he could do what he set out to do. "I see." There was a hint of bitterness in Chris's tone. Perhaps he had hoped Roman would take his side. Still, Chris soon regained his composure and got to the main point: what came next. "The situation in the southern three kingdoms, Cairo, and Hector is not good. Please give us our orders. What should we do from now on?" Chris turned his back on his own misgivings to face the very real problems ahead. Now was the time to punish the Kronos Empire for starting this war, not focus on his personal feelings. That afternoon, on Roman Dmitri's orders, Chris relayed the plan to the kingdom of Umberto. "The operation is simple. Umberto, prepare for a last stand. Make it seem like you're making a last-ditch attempt to fight before the enemy can push you into the capital, and our Lord will definitely appear on the battlefield to help." Details were lacking. With little time, only a rough outline of the plan was provided, leaving Umberto's leadership bewildered. As soon as the call ended, another meeting was convened. Some leaders who had expressed doubts in previous meetings looked worried again. This is too reckless a plan. Dimitri's main forces have expressed the intention to mobilize to help Cairo and Hector. That means the only support Umberto will have is Roman Dimitri himself. I'm not sure. It's not that I doubt Roman Dimitri's strength. The overwhelming power he's used to shake the foundation of this continent is impressive, but trusting in and basing our counterattack on just one person means we won't be able to guarantee Umberto's safety, especially considering the person in question hasn't even left Valhalla yet. That's right. If the timing is even a bit off, Umberto will bear the full brunt of the damage. Their concerns were valid. Chris wasn't sending troops their way, but instead informed them that Roman Dimitri would be heading to Umberto through Frank's warp gate immediately after leaving Valhalla. It was a strategic decision. With Cairo and Hector on the brink of collapse, Dimitri's forces had to focus on helping them. However, they couldn't abandon the southern three kingdoms either. So, since it was inefficient for Dimitri's troops to head south, Roman Dimitri decided he would handle things in the south himself. This meant they were relying on a single man for reinforcements. Considering everything that could go wrong, they couldn't just blindly throw their support behind this plan, even if it was Roman Dimitri. Everyone turned their attention to the man at the head of the table, Calderon Drake. As the person who held the decision-making power on the front lines, he took in the situation with a cool, assessing gaze. It's definitely a reckless plan. Even setting aside the fact that there's no guarantee that Roman Dimitri will arrive on time, even assuming the plan proceeds perfectly, there's no way one person can completely make up for the numerical disadvantage we're facing. Roman Dimitri is just one man. Even if he's able to take down tens of thousands of troops, handling the rest will be Umberto's job. In the end, that means ordering countless people to their deaths. This plan defied all conventional wisdom. But despite the tangled mess that was his mind, Calderon Drake soon came to a decision. Ever since Roman Dimitri first took command of Dimitri's armies, he has never lost a war. Dimitri is sending us their strongest warrior, and if he arrives on time, I'm confident we will win this battle. Therefore, we have no reason to hesitate. We must follow the plan. In these desperate times, we have no reason not to, even if it means sacrificing countless soldiers to pull it off. He saw through to the heart of the issue. The outcome of this war was what mattered. He was concerned about the casualties, of course, but his faith in Roman Dimitri was solid. The fate of Umberto is already on the line. Now that Roman Dimitri has shown how trustworthy he is as a member of the Kingdom Alliance, we need to set the stage for him to act, even if it means risking our lives to do so. And so, Umberto stopped retreating and chose to take a last stand. Count Solar's suspicions were correct. As were his concerns that Umberto's courage had been drawn out by the presence of a single man. And now, things were proceeding as planned. Just as the tension on the battlefield was reaching its peak, Roman Dimitri appeared behind Kronos. It's Roman Dimitri. Why the hell is that monster here? Kronos' soldiers screamed like they'd seen a ghost and hurriedly distanced themselves from Roman Dimitri, their faces deathly pale. Where they came from, Roman Dimitri's name was the very embodiment of fear. Kronos, which had previously been confident in its ability to claim victory over any nation, had been repeatedly defeated by him. The last war, in particular, had been overwhelming. Roman Dimitri had single-handedly slaughtered hundreds of thousands of soldiers and even defeated Selphir, an eighth-circle mage. He was an untouchable monster. The troops attacking Umberto never expected him to appear here first instead of in Dimitri. It's really annoying, said Roman, how you seem to be operating under the complacent assumption that you could win this war by keeping me from the battlefield. What are you going to do now that you have to face me? Abandon Umberto and target somebody else? He grinned, his teeth red. There was no part of his body that wasn't soaked in blood, a testament to just how many lives he had ended. An ordinary person would have collapsed long ago from such a grueling journey. But even after crossing Valhalla day and night, Roman Dimitri showed no signs of fatigue. He looked dangerously calm. He was a monster. As Roman Dmitri took a step forward, Kronos' soldiers simultaneously took a step back, almost like they'd coordinated it. "I promise you this," he said, voice low. "Every one of you involved in this war, regardless of wealth or status, will die." At that moment, the tension snapped. Attack! Kronos' army charged, driven by sheer terror. Anyone who could wield an aura unleashed it to attack Roman Dmitri. They all knew the first wave was sure to die, but what unfolded was even more devastating than they had imagined. Heads flew off. It wasn't some grand, complex technique. By releasing just a bit of his aura, Roman Dmitri decapitated every aura wielder he encountered. From that moment on, they quickly lost what little control they had of the battlefield. Roman Dmitri charged at them with the viciousness of an animal. Even after fighting all week for his fill of blood, he swung his sword like he was still thirsty. He severed arms, heads. Blood flew all around him as he carved a deadly path through the battlefield. Stop him. The plan was simple. He would focus the enemy's attention on him to prevent them from focusing on Umberto. The chaos he created would distract tens of thousands of troops. He committed a massacre. Killed, and killed again. And as expected, Count Solar soon turned his head to identify the problem on his battlefield. Could this be what it felt like to have your breath stolen? The first emotion Count Solar registered was shock. According to the plan, Roman Dmitri should have been held up for a month, but here he was, already out of Valhalla. He couldn't believe his eyes. And then came the confusion. There was only one opponent. No matter how hard he looked, no other reinforcements were visible, but the havoc wreaked by Roman Dmitri couldn't possibly have been caused by one man. Screams echoed across the battlefield. Countless soldiers rushed to the rear, but they all fell victim to the same bloody, one-sided slaughter, over and over again. This is Roman Dmitri. After everything that had happened, Kronos' commanders had learned a lesson. Roman Dmitri was no longer merely a swordsman from a small nation, but a monster that had to be hunted down and killed. Count Solar was of the same opinion. That was why, just in case, he'd prepared a contingency plan. He fired off a lightning-fast order to the knights guarding him. Let loose and defeat Roman Dmitri. Understood. Bang. Rumble. Their eyes changed instantly. Their inherent energy burst outward, amplifying their auras. Alongside the knights, several shadows slinked forward from where they were lurking nearby. Some wielded auras of their own of level 5 or higher. These were forces that had been set aside to face Roman Dmitri and Roman Dmitri alone and had not participated in the fight with Umberto until now. Therefore, Solar was certain that with a week's worth of fatigue weighing him down, Roman Dmitri would definitely be caught on the back foot. However, he was just deluding himself. As the knights who fearlessly charged in were promptly cut down, the Count's eyes went wide. Being far away, he couldn't get a good read on the situation. But every time he saw a flash, the people standing in Roman Dmitri's path all dropped to the ground with squirts of blood. They were no different from ordinary soldiers in the face of his onslaught, from the knights with their inherent energy to the shadows with their mysterious powers. All of them were swept away in the whirlwind of his aura. Whenever Roman Dmitri activated the divine demon sword technique, everything within its range was obliterated. A chill ran down Count Solar's spine. With just one person, the tide of this war was irreparably changing. If he pushed a little harder, he might be able to crush Umberto under his heel, but the chaos caused by Roman Dmitri had rendered it impossible for him to order an attack on Umberto anymore. Instead, the advancing troops were forced to change direction entirely. With a roar, they charged in with the intention of handling Roman Dmitri first, but none of them lived long enough to achieve their goal. The true demon of Dmitri was Roman Dmitri. As the bloody carnage continued, Count Solar realized that the rumors of battles past weren't exaggerated at all. The defeated generals were right. To him, the man tasked with taking down Umberto, the demoted generals responsible for Kronos' past defeats had said, "Count Solar, given our relationship so far, I have one piece of advice for you. Why do you think the great nation of Kronos is being so hasty in this war? And why are we splitting our forces to launch a simultaneous attack against the continent's kingdoms? The reason is simple: we can't handle Roman Dmitri. If Roman Dmitri steps onto the battlefield, we have no chance of winning no matter how many troops we deploy. So remember, the fact that we're splitting our armies means that your real goal is to get as much done as possible in a short window of time, and also tells you that any battlefield where Roman Dmitri appears should be abandoned immediately. Back then, Count Solar had been in denial. Kronos was a great nation. No matter how legendary Roman Dmitri was, he didn't think Kronos would base its strategy in this war around one person. Having to abandon a battlefield just because Roman Dmitri was on it, that was a heartbreaking prospect that someone proud of his empire couldn't readily accept. However, things were different now. His previous worldview had been shattered. As he watched Roman Dmitri plow through swaths of the empire's army with his own eyes, as he heard the endless screams of pain with his own ears, Count Solar understood why Kronos had tried so desperately to delay Roman Dmitri in Valhalla. They had known that the moment he appeared on the battlefield, this war was bound to get exponentially harder. The Kronos Empire had planned to first seize the upper hand, and then focus all their energy on Roman Dmitri once they had it. And considering Valhalla wasn't able to delay that monster for as long as they were supposed to, that means that Umberto isn't the battlefield Kronos had selected. At that moment, Count Solar locked eyes with Roman Dmitri in the distance. For some reason, a shudder ran through his entire body, and he recalled the last piece of advice the defeated general had given him. If you want to survive, even if it means getting called a coward like I was, remember this: the moment Roman Dmitri enters your sight, don't look back and just run. From that moment on, your life is forfeit if you hesitate. His heart skipped and sank. The general's advice was sound. But by the time he came to this realization and took a step back, he was already a moment too late. You're the commander, right? In a flurry of blood, Roman Dmitri appeared right in front of him. Chapter 392. A Presence Like No Other. Part 2. The Kronos Empire's soldiers all stared up at the sky, their minds blank as they watched the head of Count Solar, their leader, fly clean off. This can't be real. Count Solar is dead. They were dumbstruck. There was only one opponent. Yet, he tore through Kronos' army like paper, defeating Count Solar effortlessly. Fear gripped the masses. In their last full-scale war against Dmitri, most of Kronos' 300,000-strong army, confident in their victory, never returned after stepping foot in Cairo's territory. This was the same situation. The only difference was that previously, with Selfer, an 8th Circle mage, they'd had a fighting chance. But now, face to face with this formidable monster, they saw no way to stop him. Amid the chaos, Roman Dmitri pressed on. He did not stop at killing Count Solar, instead slaughtering everyone in his line of sight. Crash. Rumble. Bursts of aura lit up the battlefield. As Roman Dmitri cut down the aura swordsmen who were rushing toward him, Count Solar's deputy shouted without thinking, "Our retreat. We will preserve our forces and find another opportunity. Everyone, fall back." It was a spontaneous decision. Their primary goal was to destroy Umberto at all costs, but the deputy commander believed that pressing on would only lead to them repeating the devastating defeat they had suffered in the last full-scale war against Dmitri. Those confident they would win had mostly perished as a direct result of that overconfidence. Just as Count Solar had listened to the wisdom of the defeated generals, the memories of the horror that the deputy had heard described made it more than clear to him that fighting like this would not go well for Kronos. First and foremost, they needed to survive. If they continued onward without a plan, they would end up mere footnotes in the legend of Roman Dmitri. Ugh. Run. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. No one in Kronos' army seemed to find it strange that hundreds of thousands were fleeing at the sight of just one man. Roman Dmitri's reputation preceded him. The soldiers shoved each other in their scramble to escape, and those who were thrown back by their comrades and caught had no choice but to grit their teeth and charge at the formidable demon that was Dmitri. And without fail, their heads flew off. Limbs were torn apart and blood sprayed from limp bodies. The deputy commander didn't look back to see any of this, he just ran. Between shallow, frantic breaths, he shouted out orders to abandon the front lines and retreat, regardless of the slaughter happening behind him. Damn it. He gritted his teeth. Using his position as the new leader of Kronos' massive army to retreat like this felt humiliating, but there was no other option. They could try to ignore Roman Dmitri and focus on crushing Umberto, but if they did so without addressing the main threat, there was a chance that monster could destroy the entirety of Kronos' forces. The disastrous consequences of overlooking this one man had been more than illustrated in the last war. The deputy justified his decision, convincing himself that running away was not cowardly but necessary for Kronos' survival, especially after losing his commander. He'd save the troops. They'd mount a counterattack. Roman Dmitri was alone, so he was confident that if they used the battlefield to its fullest extent, they'd definitely find an opportunity to strike him down. The second the thought crossed his mind, it happened. How far had they fled at that point? Just as they were nearing a promisingly thick forest, figures suddenly leaped out from the brush all around them. It's Kronos. Attack. Eliminate all remaining enemy soldiers. A barrage of arrows filled the sky, and magic bombs exploded on the ground, obliterating the first wave of soldiers attempting to flee. It was a trap. The deputy's face turned pale. Why is there a trap here? A shiver ran down his spine. No way. Had Roman Dmitri anticipated their retreat? Before he could so much as process that, a powerful explosion lit up the ground beneath his feet, cutting off his thoughts forever. Boom. The mastermind behind the trap was one of Umberto's leaders. His name was Baron Berezin, and he had expressed significant doubts during recent meetings about this whole operation. Is this really the right move? The plan was reckless. And their only reinforcements were Roman Dmitri, who had suggested the ridiculous idea in the first place. Divert some of Umberto's troops to block their escape route. Set up traps and lie in wait to eliminate the enemy when they retreat. The plan sounded reasonable on the surface. But when you looked closer, the premise itself was flawed. Baron Berezin was concerned that even with Roman Dmitri's help, they would suffer significant losses against Kronos' massive army. He would have an enormous impact, as he had shown in the last war, but casualties on Umberto's side seemed inevitable. Roman Dmitri's entire plan hinged on a decisive victory. He ordered them not to focus on defense but to instead boldly divert their troops, confident that his presence would force Kronos to flee. Initially, Umberto's leadership resisted. They'd already failed to hold their own against Kronos with all of their soldiers fighting together, so allocating essential troops to block a hypothetical retreat seemed incredibly wasteful. After much debate, however, they relented. It wasn't so much that they had complete trust in Roman Dmitri, but they did have faith in the incredible feats he had performed so far. In truth, up until just a short while ago, the Baron and several others still had misgivings. They had even considered abandoning the plan to assist Umberto directly if things went awry. But the way things unfolded was shocking. Just as Roman Dmitri predicted, the Kronos army fled from the battlefield in complete disarray. They stampeded forward without even bothering with formations, like someone stumbling right into the path of a wild beast without a weapon. Boom. Kaboom. Arg. Carefully laid magic bombs exploded in all directions, taking out thousands of soldiers at once and shocking Kronos' army to a halt. Meanwhile, arrows fell from the sky in a deadly rain. Without proper shield formation set up to deflect them, they tore through arms and skewered foreheads instantly. Thunk. Chaos erupted. As they saw their comrades fall one after another, the Kronos Empire's army charged in frantically, terror etched into every line of their faces. Attack. Clear the way. There was no other option. Behind them, Roman Dmitri was in pursuit. Well aware that being caught by him would mean certain death, the soldiers charged forward despite the unfavorable circumstances. From that moment, a hellish scrum unfolded. No matter how formidable Kronos was, breaking through Umberto's pre-planned defenses proved near impossible. bodies piled up. The wave of enemies rushing toward him was terrifying, but Baron Berezin remained unshaken. The man who had initially been doubtful was now the picture of blind faith. In his heart, and in the hearts of his soldiers, there was now an unwavering conviction. Hold the line. If we hold here, Roman Dmitri will reach us. Sure enough, a massacre soon began in the rear as Baron Berezin, his face alight with excitement, ordered his soldiers to fight to the death. Umberto's soldiers let out an enthusiastic cheer as Roman Dmitri arrived at their capital, backlit by the setting sun. Roman! 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 Thank you! Thanks to you, Umberto has survived catastrophe. The crowd was in a frenzy. They had all seen it with their own eyes, the dramatic difference this single man had made. The way Kronos began to falter as he single-handedly slaughtered them, allowing Umberto to seize the opportunity and eliminate the enemy entirely. Just days ago, Umberto had been fighting for survival. Now, having witnessed Roman Dimitri's legendary prowess firsthand, they were riotous in their admiration. And that was the case for Umberto's leadership as well. Those who had previously voiced doubts about the operation were the first to step forward with broad smiles. Baron Berezin, for his part, was at the front of the line. You are truly amazing. Honestly, I never thought you would be able to take out so many of Kronos' soldiers alone. But after seeing you in action, I fully understand why they call you the continent's strongest swordsman, Roman Dmitri. Thank you, sincerely. Thanks to you, Umberto has come back from the brink of destruction. We will guide you inside. Their eyes shone with goodwill. They were still in awe. Just one person, just one single reinforcement. While Dimitri's main forces had dispersed to Cairo and Hector, Roman Dimitri's arrival instantly turned the tide of a battle that had been deemed unwinnable. Common sense dictated that no one individual could defeat the masses. But if that individual was strong enough to defy all logic, things like numerical superiority became irrelevant. That was something Kronos knew well. They had intentionally split this war into multiple fronts in an attempt to dilute the impact of any single individual. Their celebration was short-lived and tabled for later. This war was not yet over, and they now needed to hold a leadership meeting to figure out what to do next. Calderon Drake gave up his spot at the head of the table, and under Roman Dimitri's watchful eye, Baron Berezin began to speak. First, let me explain Umberto's current state of affairs. Umberto has suffered significant losses as a result of Kronos' assault. As of now, assuming we leave some defensive troops in our homeland in case of subsequent attacks, the number of troops we can send to other countries is less than 100,000. Despite their recent victory, the alliance's current state of affairs was grim. Cairo, Hector, the lawless zone, the war was raging on in these three regions, and without swift intervention, any of them could fall at any moment. How about addressing the issue of the southern three kingdoms first? The Baron suggested. Just as Dmitri sent troops to Cairo and Hector, considering the enemy's movements, I believe it'd be best for Umberto's troops to tackle the lawless zone first. If we can stabilize the southern three kingdoms, we can then focus on the other battlefields. It was a reasonable suggestion. However, Roman Dmitri did not agree. Looking down at the map on the table, he began to break down the battlefields one by one. We need to manage our troops wisely from now on. First, there's the western front of Cairo. The Kronos Empire has mobilized a large army to attack them, but Cairo still stands strong to this day. This doesn't mean the situation is encouraging, however. Over the years, the Cairo kingdom has been preparing for war, convinced that Kronos was liable to nullify ceasefire negotiations at any time. Thanks to these preparations, they've held out thus far, but this recent defeat in Umberto will leave Kronos desperate. They will likely do everything in their power to crush Cairo before any other unexpected surprises can crop up. He shifted his gaze to Hector's territory. Second, the southern front of Hector. Initially, I thought they wouldn't be able to hold out for long, but Prince Edwin Hector has reached the seventh circle, which has turned this situation on its head. He has also secured the loyalty of the mages from the Heavenly Magic Tower. These mages specialize in defense and have been holding the line with their magical prowess. But now comes the problem: Valhalla failed to delay me, which means the soldiers who no longer have a target will now be heading not to the southern three kingdoms but directly to Hector. This means that Hector will soon be facing an all-out war with Valhalla. Both fronts looked dire. However, the final one, the lawless zone, was a different story. Compared to the first two fronts, the situation in the lawless zone isn't as critical. The people causing chaos in the lawless zone are ultimately just rioters. Since they do not have an organized military, it won't be hard to deal with any attacks they might launch against us, even if we don't prioritize stabilizing the area. Without siege equipment or magical weapons, these mobs have no means of seizing a high castle anytime soon. It was time to make a choice. And Roman Dmitri had already made his. For that reason, I plan to exclude the southern three kingdoms situation from our list of priorities. It was a bold move. Unlike the flustered Baron Berezin, Calderon Drake felt goosebumps upon hearing Roman Dmitri's statement. Prioritizing battlefields. Roman Dmitri has always understood the nature of war. Dmitri's assessment was spot on. For Umberto, resolving the issue in the south would provide peace of mind. However, in the broader context of the war, the lawless zone wasn't a significant enough concern to focus their energy on. The mobs there were ordinary people. They might have been violent, but that didn't mean they could capture a castle at a speed that would make them an immediate threat. Time was of the essence here. And in this race against time, Roman Dmitri laid out their priorities for everyone to see. Cairo and Hector are under direct threat from the two empires. And while the rest of the kingdom alliance is in disarray, Roman Dmitri held fast to his philosophy of need-based intervention and chose to aid Umberto. After Dmitri defeated Kronos on their own soil, Umberto became the most vulnerable battlefield, which was why he chose to help us rather than one of our other allies. He prioritized us according to urgency. Therefore, they trusted him. Someone focused solely on their own self-interest might have prioritized battlefields that would have a direct impact on Dmitri's national security. However, by aiding Umberto, Roman Dmitri had demonstrated that he was objectively assessing the war as a whole. Calderon Drake spoke up. I agree with Lord Roman Dmitri's opinion. Instead of the lawless zone to the south, we should prioritize resolving the battles in Cairo and Hector first. The issue is which one to focus on. The Kingdom Alliance has few troops to spare. If we split our forces without a clear strategy in mind, we risk suffering defeats on both fronts, so we need to address each issue one at a time. Additionally, Umberto can only offer limited reinforcements, making it impossible for us to tackle both fronts simultaneously anyway. Kronos and Valhalla would be dedicating all of their resources to these two battlefields. With the fate of their countries at stake, everyone at the table was confident that things would not be as easy as the fight in Umberto. Their gazes all gravitated to Roman Dmitri. With Calderon Drake's agreement, there was no reason for further debate. Especially when people like Baron Berezin now had full faith in Roman Dmitri thanks to the recent battle. The plan is simple, said Roman. He took a game piece, the knight representing Umberto's troops, and moved it, placing it for everyone to see. Clack. Eyes went wide all around the table. The location where the knight had been moved was unexpected. We will now advance straight toward the Kronos Empire. A push north. That was Roman Dmitri's decision. Chapter 393. A presence like no other. Part 3. The solution was a baffling one. Roman Dmitri wasn't suggesting an attack on Cairo's western front or Hector's southern front, but a direct assault on Kronos itself. It was a dangerous proposition. Unable to accept it out of hand, Calderon Drake voiced his concerns. The strategy you've outlined has numerous issues. First of all, a direct attack on Kronos' territory with Umberto's 100,000 troops is tantamount to suicide. And even if we were to attack them, there's no guarantee it would alleviate the pressure being put on Cairo and Hector. There's a saying in warfare that the best defense is a good offense, but if our attack fails, this will spiral into an irreversible catastrophe. You're right. I agree that this plan carries significant risks. Roman shifted his posture, leaning back in his chair and taking in the entirety of the expansive map laid out before him. But as I mentioned earlier, this war is a matter of priorities. If we don't deal with the problems we're facing in the correct sequence, even a single misstep could jeopardize the entire kingdom alliance. We can't tackle the issues of Cairo and Hector simultaneously. That's why I've chosen a strategy that will allow us to have an equal impact on both fronts, rather than focusing on just one. Please elaborate. Firstly, if the kingdoms of Frank and Redford choose to defend against the outlaws in the lawless zone rather than actively attack them, they'll have a relative surplus of troops. We'll send them to Hector. If they join forces with Hector's mages to face Valhalla together, they should be able to withstand Valhalla's weakened offensive to some extent. He moved some of the game pieces on the map. The pieces representing Frank and Redford were now positioned in Hector's territory, arrayed against Valhalla. The problem is Cairo. We could intervene directly on the western front while Hector, Frank, and Redford buy time against Valhalla, but the enemy will be expecting us to do that. They're likely to draw this out into a war of attrition. Then, if Hector falls to Valhalla and the mobs from the lawless zone breach Frank's border, the war raging across the continent will slowly but surely snuff out the Kingdom Alliance. But what do you think will happen if we launch a direct attack on Kronos' territory? The army Kronos deployed to the western front will be forced to worry about what's happening back home, and even Valhalla will be preoccupied with this unexpected development. What if Valhalla simply continues their offensive, though? Ultimately, Valhalla isn't the one under attack. At that, Roman Dmitri smiled. They won't be able to. The main player in this war is the Kronos Empire. Kronos is the one that mobilized Valhalla, and if Kronos' territory is set ablaze, their primary objective is sure to shift. Think about it, why is Valhalla trying to destroy Hector right now? Because it intends to attack Dmitri afterward. But if I, the leader of Dmitri, start rampaging through Kronos' territory, they can't just stand back and watch. They'll be forced to move their troops. As the forces Kronos has on Cairo's western front retreat to protect their own country, Valhalla will likely move to block the border Umberto shares with Kronos. That's the only way they'll be able to cut off my escape route. In essence, he was offering himself up as bait. It was a dangerous plan. It was true that if things proceeded according to Roman Dimitri's predictions, they would definitely draw the empire's attention, but the risks were far too great. Then, Roman added, the enemy will not vanquish us. I will personally lead the vanguard in this attack. We need to make a forceful push forward and wreak havoc on their home base to sow chaos on the battlefield. It doesn't matter if the enemy blocks our retreat. If they react as I expect they will, then the Kingdom Alliance will be able to wage an all-out war against the two empires not spread thin across the entire continent, but on the foreign soil of the Kronos Empire. Calderon Drake felt another chill run down his spine. With every word Roman Dmitri spoke, each piece of the puzzle fell perfectly into place, presenting them a way to resolve all of the Kingdom Alliance's problems in one fell swoop. And the biggest issue, the danger inherent in directly attacking Kronos, seemed to melt away in the face of Roman Dimitri's declaration that he would be on the front lines. Somehow, someway, what was impossible just moments ago now seemed feasible. Of course, if Umberto wasn't able to get past Kronos' border, the operation would be a complete failure. But Calderon Drake had faith in Roman Dmitri. With him, they might just be able to pull this off. Understood, said Calderon. Then, from this moment on, the Kingdom of Umberto will lend their full support to Roman Dimitri's operation. The next day, Baron Denikin, the man in charge of defending Kronos' southern border, received strange news from a scout. Commander, something's wrong. Umberto's army isn't heading toward Cairo or Hector. They're marching toward our southern border. At this rate, they'll reach us soon. What? The Baron flew into a panic. A northward advance. He hadn't even considered the possibility. Kronos had been the one to start this war. The prospect of an enemy counterattack hadn't so much as crossed his mind. Roman Dimitri's arrival devastated Count Solar's army. He's the kind of monster who can pull off feats like that with only Umberto for backup. If he attacks the southern border, will we be able to stop him with the troops we have stationed here? They were talking about one man, and yet, he couldn't confidently say yes. The towering walls and robust magical defenses that lined Kronos' southern border had never once allowed invaders through, but the things Roman Dmitri was capable of defied convention. Above all, most of Kronos' forces were currently concentrated in Cairo's western front. Baron Denikin knew this wasn't a problem he could solve with his authority. He immediately contacted his superiors. In a magic telegram with Marquis Memphis, he reported the possibility that Roman Dmitri was advancing north to attack Kronos. This is preposterous. To choose to attack instead of defend at a time like this. On the screen, Marquis Memphis was the picture of disbelief. The saying "a good offense is the best defense" was a well-known one in military strategy, but actually putting it into action was a different matter entirely. One wrong move could lead to failure on both the offensive and defensive fronts. If they were unable to break through Kronos' defenses and Cairo gave up, Roman Dimitri's risky call would end up plunging the Kingdom alliance into a state of ruin. Even so, he wasn't hesitating. The troops approaching the southern border clearly conveyed their intentions. Roman Dmitri did the same thing in his confrontation with Valhalla. With both sides refusing to back down from their game of chicken, he shocked the world by taking them down. Baron Denikin, Kronos will not meet the same fate as Valhalla. The reason Kronos is celebrated as the strongest on the continent of Salamander is that it's powerful enough to attack the entire continent and still have strength to spare. In other words, they had no intention of withdrawing their main forces from Cairo. They would continue to push forward, and the troops that remained on Kronos' soil would have to stop Roman Dmitri themselves. Hold out for just 1 week. I'll send Castro with reinforcements. Baron Denikin's eyes widened. Castro, sir? Although Roman Dmitri was now effectively recognized as the strongest swordsman on the continent, officially, William Castro still held the rank of number 1. This was Kronos' strongest swordsman. Sending him in was a clear message that Kronos had no intention of rolling over and letting Roman Dmitri pass. That they intended to crush his attempt to invade their homeland decisively. That the Kronos Empire that Roman Dmitri was attempting to challenge was without a doubt the strongest nation on the continent. Baron Denikin bowed his head. I will carry out your orders, Marquis. Just 1 week. He vowed to buy enough time, even if doing so cost him his life. 2 days later, Umberto's army was visible beyond the border. It had taken Roman Dmitri a majority of those 2 days just to assemble his forces and reach Kronos. On the ramparts, Baron Denikin asked his aide, how many troops do they have? They're about 100,000 strong. Umberto has mobilized nearly all of its forces, except for those needed to defend its capital. They don't seem to have any real magical core. Honestly, if it weren't for Roman Dmitri, there'd be no reason to be on guard. To launch a full-scale assault with only 100,000 troops. Roman Dmitri is definitely not a normal man. The situation in Cairo and Hector was extremely volatile. The two kingdoms seemed to have escaped immediate danger thanks to the arrival of Dimitri's reinforcements, but they were still liable to fall at any moment under the empire's relentless assault. That was why Roman Dimitri's decision was so dangerous. No matter which of the two, Cairo or Hector, he chose to help, the other would have fallen eventually. But by attacking Kronos directly, he had robbed the two empires of time. This was now a battle against time. Everyone was up against a wall. If they couldn't bring down the enemy first, the tides of this war would shift dramatically. We will forego any counterattacks and focus solely on defense. Double-check our magical defenses. No matter what tricks Roman Dmitri pulls, we will hold the line here for 1 week until reinforcements arrive. Yes, sir. The aide bustled off to order the soldiers to perform thorough checks for potential issues. But even so, Baron Denikin was uneasy. Having heard the tale of Roman Dimitri's reputation and various feats, he eyed the land beyond the border nervously as time crept by. Clunk. 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 Soon, Umberto's army was close enough to form ranks. Then, a man stepped out of line and walked forward. Our Roman Dimitri. Oh, gods. Kronos' soldiers were petrified. Roman Dimitri was notorious for killing all those who faced him on the battlefield. It was impossible for them to remain composed in the face of that power, even with their empire behind them. Tap. He stopped walking just out of range. As Baron Denikin watched, back tense, Roman Dimitri amplified his voice with mana to address them at large. You, the Kronos Empire, have unilaterally broken the ceasefire between our nations, allying with Valhalla to launch a simultaneous attack on the Kingdom Alliance. I won't even bother mentioning the continental laws that you've broken. Since the victor of this war will become the ruler of Salamander, its current laws are not a particularly relevant concern. It was a strange sight. Even dwarfed by Kronos' towering walls, Roman Dimitri seemed utterly serene. But this war is making me wonder. The Kronos Empire calls itself the continent's strongest nation. If your claim is true, you should have no reason to back down from any fight. Yet, you have taken actions in this war that can only be described as cowardly. You used teleportation magic to attack Dimitri directly, avoiding me. You attacked Cairo, Hector, and the southern three kingdoms, avoiding me. You tried to trap me in Valhalla so I couldn't participate in this war at all. Now, I have no intention of criticizing the use of any means necessary. The question is Kronos excluding me because that's the strategic thing to do, or are you only making that choice because you know you can't stop me? Every word jabbed at their pride. It was indeed a valid question. If Kronos really had the power to defeat Roman Dimitri, there would be no need for them to go about this war in such a convoluted manner. I intend to find out the answer to my question right now. When I choose to attack instead of defend, how will Kronos respond? And does Kronos truly have the power to stop me? Just know this, if your armies end up being weaker than I thought, I'm going to behead the emperor and plant Dimitri's flag in the imperial capital. A cold chill settled over the crowd. It was an incredibly arrogant statement. They wanted to write him off as out of his mind, but since this was Roman Dimitri they were talking about, no one dared to speak up. It almost seemed possible when he said it. In fact, based on the things he'd achieved so far, there was no such thing as impossible for Roman Dimitri. So, do everything in your power to stop me, starting now. With that, he began to take slow, steady steps toward Kronos' ramparts. It was an unreal sight. The soldiers of the Umberto kingdom stood in the rear, none of them moving a muscle as Roman Dimitri alone walked toward Kronos' walls. The moment he crossed into firing range, Baron Denikin's voice thundered across the ramparts. Attack! Whoosh! A swarm of arrows shot into the sky. As they rained down in a torrential, deadly downpour, Roman Dimitri disappeared from everyone's sight. Swish! Thud! 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 The arrows sank harmlessly into the ground without a target to hit, Roman Dimitri already rapidly closing the distance with the walls. Arrow after arrow was fired at Baron Denikin's increasingly frantic command, thousands of them, all to deal with a single enemy. If it meant taking down Roman Dimitri, they didn't care about depleting their resources. Explosion. Stone rain. Boom. Whoosh. Whoosh. Magic flew at him from all sides. This was an unusual situation. Traditionally, mages faced large numbers of enemies at a time. Yet here they were, pushing their mana to the limit in a display of explosive magic, all for one man. Boom! The ground beneath Roman Dimitri collapsed, but he just leaped, stepping between the fragmented chunks of earth. Any arrows coming his way were easily blocked by a barrier of aura. Every time they blinked, the distance between him and the walls shrunk drastically. The mages desperately hurled more spells at him, but he simply broke through them with his bare body, without even bothering with defense. Whoosh! He was getting closer and closer. Baron Denikin's eyebrows twitched as he struggled to come to terms with what he was seeing. This is absurd. Surely the monster wasn't planning to open the gates alone. It was an impossible feat and, on the off chance something like this happened, Baron Denikin had prepared a trap in advance. Now, Beep. 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 The magic bombs below activated, and at the same time, lightning rain. Zap. Zop. The mages combined their power to cast a spell. As the bombs below went up in a violent explosion, hundreds of lightning bolts rained down from the sky, engulfing Roman Dimitri's form in a blinding, earth-shattering flash. A cloud of dust billowed high into the air, and the world was bathed in bright light as all life in the attack's radius was vaporized. We got him. He clenched his fist. Their opponent was only a man, after all. He was confident that the human body was too fragile to withstand the full force of the trap they had so carefully laid. But the moment that thought crossed his mind, "What?" He heard bewildered shouts go up from the soldiers. Everyone looked up at the sky just in time to see feet fall directly onto their ramparts. Thud. Rumble. Rumble. Only then were they able to process what was happening. Roman Dimitri had landed on the ramparts, alone. Chapter 394. A Presence Like No Other. Part 4. It had always been a mystery to Roman. Alexander was always so certain of victory. No matter what feats Roman accomplished, anyone who brought him up always reiterated the same confident assertions of triumph. In truth, the Kronos Empire's actions were contradictory. They repeatedly claimed that Roman Dimitri couldn't change the outcome of this war on his own, yet they made every effort to keep him from the battlefield. So what was the source of their confidence? He wanted to find out. He wanted to see how they would react if he pushed them to the very edge, to see if Alexander truly had the power to stop him. If, as Mother Elf said, they believed in the existence of the Devil Dom, they would see it themselves. Attack, GCK. Slash. Blood spurted from the neck of the knight about to give the order. The situation was a powder keg about to explode, and the murder lit the fuse. The tension snapped, and the soldiers of the Kronos Empire rushed forward with rage in their eyes. Kill him. Attack. This was a familiar routine to him at this point. As countless people charged at him with the intent to kill, Roman calmly swung his sword. Divine Demon Sword Technique, First Sequence, Second Form. Rumble. A maelstrom of aura tore through the front lines. Those running in, their own auras raised, were shredded by the blades of wind. The sight forced those further back to confront reality. This was Roman Dimitri, the man who had single-handedly defeated an army of 300,000 and turned the tide of the war against Umberto. By the time they realized they'd made a grievous mistake, he was already in their midst. Stab. Slash. It was a massacre. Those surrounding him all fell, blood spraying from their wounds. Roman Dimitri carved his way through the battlefield, slaughtering anyone who stood in his way without exception. Ordinary soldiers who chose to attack him simultaneously were beheaded in one swing. Knights bursting with aura were split in half along with their swords. And then, rumble. He stomped the ground hard and swung his sword, and another whirlwind of aura, much like the first, ripped through the space. It was a baffling sight. This was a completely different approach from a normal siege. As he indiscriminately slaughtered those on the ramparts, Baron Denikin found himself unable to give any orders. He finally understood why he'd only been told to hold out for a week. From the beginning, Marquis Memphis knew that Baron Denikin wouldn't be able to do it. As one who had great insight into Roman Dimitri, the fact that he hadn't sent reinforcements here immediately spoke volumes. The people here had been abandoned. They were merely pawns to buy time, whether a minute or a second, until the reinforcements he'd dispatched arrived. But there was nothing for it. Stop him, he roared. Stop him, damn it. Disobeying orders and abandoning his post would be a death sentence anyway. All he could hope was that Roman Dimitri, surrounded as he was by swaths of soldiers, would fall to a stray sword. In the meantime, Umberto's forces were pouring over the ramparts and needed to be dealt with. Normally, this was when the archers would be commanded to attack. Some of them, understanding Baron Denikin's intent without him needing to say it, knocked their arrows, but they were beheaded before they could even fire. Flash. Rumble. Roman Dmitri was preventing those on the ramparts from doing their jobs, forcing everyone to focus their attention on eliminating him and him alone. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before the ramparts fell to Umberto. It was then that the monster spoke. "Contact Central Command. If no one comes to stop me." Slice. Crash. In a single swing, he cut the chains connected to the fortress gate. The huge door fell onto the moat, revealing a wave of Umberto soldiers that quickly rushed in from the other side. Kronos will suffer irreparable consequences. In sharp contrast to the chaos happening around the continent as a result of the war, the people of Kronos' capital were able to go about their daily lives in peace. Like Marquis Memphis, who was currently sitting in his office, handling the emperor's duties. Scribble. Ever since Alexander for some reason stepped back from his role, all of the Kronos Empire's affairs, big and small, were decided by Marquis Memphis. As such, he was privy to the real reason they were pushing for this war. He had known that Kronos' emperor was connected to a mysterious power, but he still felt a shiver go down his spine the first time he met Alexander. At that moment, he finally realized who his true master was. From then on, he followed every order Alexander gave him, taking care to ensure he didn't stray from a single guideline set. One of his subordinates entered the room, looking nervous. "Our first line of defense has fallen. Baron Denikin is presumed dead at the scene. Roman Dmitri set fire to the fortress and is moving immediately to his next destination." Tap. His pen stilled. He looked up at his aide, eyes cold. "He couldn't even hold out for a day?" "No, sir." "What a useless fool. He said he would hold out for a week, but he was all talk." Roman Dmitri's intention in setting fire to our frontline defenses is clear. It's a warning that if no one comes to stop him, he will raise every inch of Kronos he gets his hands on to the ground. It was ridiculous. In the entirety of Kronos' history, they had never faced such an aggressive opponent. Roman Dmitri pushed forward like a man who had nothing to lose. If they couldn't stop him, Kronos' main forces would inevitably be thrown into disarray. If he hadn't seen the truth for himself, Marquis Memphis might have been panicked right now. But he knew exactly what Kronos was preparing. As someone granted the privilege of being privy to Alexander's genius, he was filled only with anticipation and confidence in the future to come. However, that didn't mean he liked what was going on. The way Roman Dmitri kept threatening Kronos was getting on Marquis Memphis's nerves. "I suppose we need to handle this personally, then. Honestly, I'm starting to get curious myself. Just how far can Roman Dmitri go against Kronos?" He smiled. No further orders needed to be issued. He had already sent out forces to deal with Roman Dmitri, and they were forces that even Roman Dmitri would find difficult to defeat. Just as Alexander was confident, Marquis Memphis also had an unshakable faith in Kronos. As this was already their third battle together, Umberto knew its role by heart by now. Roman Dmitri would sweep through the enemy, and then the troops would advance in his wake. "Leave no one alive. Take no prisoners. Kill them all." The result was complete victory. With Roman Dmitri sowing chaos inside and even opening their gates, the Kronos Empire was left unable to take advantage of its defensive position. With 3 fortresses already lost, Roman Dmitri was liable to strike anywhere and wreak havoc. The empire had found itself in a precarious situation. Crunch. The rubble of the fortress gate crunched under his feet as Calderon Drake entered and took in the devastation before him. Is this the power of Roman Dmitri? In truth, he had initially opposed this strategy. Roman's plan to rush in and open the gates on his own was something anyone with a brain would oppose. It wasn't a matter of trusting him or not. If he simply took Umberto's troops with him, things would have been much easier. Calderon couldn't understand why he'd want to take on such a huge risk alone. At the time, Roman Dmitri had said this. "Umberto's forces number only 100,000. We may end up having to fight several battles on Kronos' soil, and the fewer troops we have, the less pressure Kronos will feel. For that reason, we must preserve Umberto's numbers as much as possible." The primary purpose of this operation is to actively utilize my presence in a way that makes it impossible for Kronos to ignore what's happening here. It was impressive, both his ability to assess the situation and his confidence in carrying out such a strange plan. He was truly someone who transcended the will of the heavens. It would have been incredibly disappointing if he hadn't been able to live up to expectations, but Roman Dmitri had indeed destroyed 3 fortresses in short order, as promised. The soldiers of Umberto were now true believers. They were ready to jump into a fire pit if Roman Dmitri told them to. Calderon Drake couldn't help but admit it, heaven had not abandoned this world. Now that Kronos had shown its true colors, the existence of someone like Roman Dmitri was proof of the divine. With that in mind, Calderon took stock of the destruction. He was about to order his troops to set fire to the fortress again, but Roman Dmitri stopped him. Refortify the fortress and prepare for a siege. May I ask why? According to the information I received, Kronos' reinforcements are nearby. There's no reason to meet them on an open field. Let's refortify this fortress, get some rest, and then reassess after the battle is over. Where did you get such information? He was amazed. They were in the middle of a war, yet Roman Dmitri was casually relaying that he had intel on the enemy's movements. He couldn't help but be impressed. The situation had changed. Calderon Drake followed the orders he was given. And the next day, as expected, Kronos' reinforcements appeared on the horizon. Tension hung over the ramparts. Under the watchful eye of Umberto's soldiers, the Kronos Empire's army formed ranks just outside of firing range. And then, a man walked forward. He was clad in heavy black armor, his face barely visible to the naked eye. But people immediately recognized him. That dragon-shaped armor was a gift personally bestowed by the Emperor of Kronos upon a particular man. No way. Castro? Why is William Castro here? Everyone was shocked. Beyond the fact that Kronos' strongest blade had appeared on the battlefield, William Castro was the guardian of the imperial family, tasked with protecting the emperor. He never left the palace under any circumstances. They couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that he had appeared here on the southern front. It was highly irregular and conveyed Kronos' intentions rather clearly. Certain death. They obviously intended to resolve this with the troops they had at home, rather than recalling their main forces. Clang, clang. The tension grew suffocating. William Castro confidently entered the firing range, stopped at a suitable distance, and looked up at the ramparts. I am Castro of Kronos. His voice was raspy. From within his helmet, Umberto's soldiers caught a glimpse of that terrifying glint in his eyes. Roman Dmitri, I challenge you to a duelist tourney. At those words, the crowd's minds went blank. Over the past few years, there was one thing that had become taboo on the battlefield. Do not accept a duelist tourney against Dmitri. It was a painful lesson learned from those who had died by doing so. Those who had engaged in duelist tourneys against Dmitri had all suffered crushing defeats. At some point, people stopped accepting duelist tourneys altogether. It was only natural. Roman Dmitri was a man who was impossible to defeat even with superior numbers on your side. A one-on-one duel with him was suicide. That was why everyone was so surprised. They never expected William Castro, of all people, to request a duel with Roman Dmitri. Whoosh! Roman Dmitri jumped down from the ramparts, landing on the ground with light feet. His expression as he regarded William Castro was utterly calm. I accept. Swish. He drew his sword. The tension ratcheted up from stifling to suffocating. William Castro drew his sword as well, his ominous red eyes fixed on Roman Dmitri. Roman Dmitri. After hearing news of your exploits on the battlefield, I have been looking forward to this moment. It's ridiculous, but many speak as if you have already surpassed me. They say that considering Ares defeated Caesar, Valhalla's top-ranked knight, Roman Dmitri, who single-handedly slaughtered hundreds of thousands of troops, must be far above me. Rumble. The very air around him seemed to vibrate, almost as if the dark armor was absorbing all of the light in its reach. Mana rolled off of him in turbulent waves. It's truly laughable. I reached this position decades ago. Back when you were first learning to swing a sword and absorb mana, I was already the continent's strongest swordsman with no equal. People seem to think that I haven't made any progress while stationed at the Emperor's side. They seem to think that because I confined myself to the palace because my blood and sweat are shed out of their sight, I must not be shedding any at all. These people didn't know the kind of life William Castro lived in the palace. The Emperor of Kronos had no rivals. Since no one in the world dared to go after him, William Castro had no real work to do in terms of protecting him. So he spent his days training like a dog. If ever someone appeared who dared to challenge the Kronos Empire, there was no doubt they would be a monster unlike any the world had ever seen. So he swung his sword from sunrise to sunset. Sweat poured from him in rivulets. People's perception of him remained the same, but through this repetitive routine, he improved bit by bit every day. This was who William Castro was. He simply hadn't had an opportunity to cross blades in a while. Long ago, when Caesar faced him on the battlefield, he said afterward that it felt like staring down an insurmountable wall. In terms of continental ranking, Kronos' top-ranked knight and Valhalla's top-ranked knight were only one rank apart. But those who had witnessed their duel declared it a difference between heaven and earth. Rumble. His aura surged, swallowing up its surroundings. Its destructive force seemed to defy the laws of nature. Roman Dmitri, by defeating you, I, William Castro, will once again prove to the people that I am this continent's strongest blade. There was no denying it, William Castro had reached new heights with his aura that no one else in the history of Salamander had ever reached. The summit of level 7. Chapter 395. A presence like no other. Part 5. Everyone held their breath. No, they had no choice but to hold their breath. A destructive aura surged outward with Castro at its epicenter, rendering it impossible for them to even breathe. And then it happened. Whoosh. Rumble. Castro pushed off the ground. The duel had already begun the moment their eyes met, and Castro's aura tore through the battlefield with a force unlike anything they had ever seen before. The aura, extending dozens of meters from his blade and seemingly piercing the heavens themselves, instantly made for Roman Dimitri's form. Boom. Crack. The power was immense. The ground below burst apart, swept up in the cyclone. As Roman Dimitri evaded the attack, a crack appeared in the rampart behind him. It was a shocking sight. They had applied layer after layer of magical barriers to the walls of the fortress in preparation for Kronos' siege, but the mere shockwave from this man's aura had torn through them all in an instant. And then... boom. Rumble. Castro pressed into Roman Dimitri's guard. Like divine judgment from on high, that massive aura came down repeatedly on Roman Dimitri's head. The wind howled around him, making it hard to even see clearly. Just the sight of Roman Dimitri withstanding such a ferocious attack was awe-inspiring. The two of them were operating on a level that the average person could only dream of. Level 7 auras were truly in a league of their own. If Roman Dimitri's new aura technique focused on efficiency, Castro's indiscriminate output demonstrated an inhuman destructive potential as it reached its peak. As your reputation suggests, you are no ordinary foe, said Castro. Whoosh. He closed the distance. With his eyes narrowed into menacing slits, he tracked Roman Dimitri around the battlefield, launching swift and concise attacks aimed at his vitals. Swish. Rumble. He was strong. Castro did not constantly unleash powerful bursts, but instead adjusted the intensity of his aura according to the situation, relentlessly hounding his opponent. Roman Dimitri's cold eyes tracked Castro's movements. Any opening would be met with an immediate and lethal counterattack. Boom. He parried an attack and slashed at his opponent. As a flash of light skimmed Castro's neck, Castro lunged forward aggressively, attempting a counterattack. It was a strange sight. Not a single person in recent memory had managed to exchange blows with Roman Dimitri, yet Castro had proven his prowess in just a short clash. People had underestimated him. Just because he had spent much of the past few years at the palace did not mean his skills had deteriorated. On the contrary, he had improved. He had reached heights that others couldn't even dream of reaching, proclaiming himself the supreme swordsman of Kronos. However, pathetic. In an instant, Castro's expression contorted under his helmet. Pathetic? What was Roman Dmitri thinking, saying such a thing during their intense exchange? Was his swordsmanship, his aura, so unremarkable that it could be described as pathetic by Roman Dmitri's standards? Whatever his reasons, Castro could not accept such dismissal. He had insisted on this duelist tourney for the express purpose of proving himself as a swordsman, even though he knew it would be more arduous for him. Therefore, let's see if you can still say something like that after this attack, he said, pointing his blade up at the sky. Rumble. Rumble. His violent black aura surged around him, converging on the tip of his sword like a black hole. This was the most powerful secret technique in his tool belt. Against foes like Caesar, he had never even needed to use it. He had vowed to only use it if and when a monster like Roman Dmitri appeared. Castro couldn't imagine anyone withstanding this attack. Noticing Roman Dmitri attempting to pull his sword back to block it, Castro unleashed the ball of aura before he could. In that instant. Flash. He saw it. His aura, descending according to Castro's wishes, was instantaneously split by a flash of something. It was an indescribable sight. That attack had his full strength behind it, yet it was torn apart just like that, and a sudden, burning pain tore across his face. Arg! The next thing he knew, his knees were hitting the ground. As he stared down at the dirt, he saw drops of blood falling from his cheeks alongside the shattered pieces of his helmet. It was an utter defeat. As this realization sank in, Roman Dmitri's voice rang out above him, cold as a blade. In all my life, I have never met an opponent who could withstand my full power. And Castro raised his head. The sunlight illuminated Roman Dmitri from behind. You are no exception, the monster said. Suddenly, a memory flashed through Castro's mind. Alexander, who had imparted upon him his teachings, had looked down at Castro and Ares and said, I have high expectations of the two of you. Castro follows my technique, while Ares follows a new one. Show me which one is truly correct. If one of you produces results that satisfy me, I promise to acknowledge the one who does as the greatest swordsman in the new world and bestow upon him all the riches and glory he desires. This is as important a matter to me as conquering the continent of Salamander. Alexander's desire was genuine. He could not let go of his past life. He wished to revitalize martial arts, and as they were of different eras, Castro and Ares each chose different paths. Initially, Castro's growth was staggering. Naturally, he had been alive far longer than Ares, so he was quickly able to make a reputation for himself as the best on the continent using Alexander's teachings. However, things changed as Ares grew older. Ares was initially just a fledgling he didn't need to pay any mind, but as he absorbed the new technique he was assigned, he grew rapidly, threatening Castro's position. Then one day, after the war with Dmitri ended, Alexander came to Castro with a stunned look on his face and said, Castro, your technique, no, my technique, cannot defeat Roman Dmitri. The swordsmanship that Roman Dmitri uses is the ideal I have been envisioning. So, there is no need for you to toil any further. From now on, I intend to focus on supporting Ares and send him to Dmitri as a spy to steal Roman Dmitri's techniques. My technique, which changed the world, was unfortunately not the answer. This had come as a shock. Castro had worked relentlessly to reach level 7. He was at a stage in his development where he could defeat someone like Ares in a single strike. To be told that all of his efforts were for naught was something he could not accept. From then on, he dedicated himself even more intensely to his training. In order to prove that Alexander was wrong, he worked like a dog to hone his technique. And yet, gurgle. He'd been defeated. With blood burbling up from his insides, Castro stared up at Roman Dmitri in despair. Alexander was right. My technique cannot defeat you. I devoted my entire life to perfecting that strike you so casually deflected, but it was doomed to fail from the start. His voice was a rough, roiling thing, sadness, injustice, anger, and many other emotions all mixed together. But as he glared up at the man before him, resentment dominated them all. I admit it. You are indeed the continent's greatest swordsman. But... whoosh. Rumble. A dark energy billowed up around Castro, and his eyes turned completely black. Whoosh. Then the world around them was dyed in darkness. That does not mean you will leave this place alive. From the start, Castro had had two motivations for suggesting a duelist tourney. The first was to engage in a pure contest of skill. The second, in case of defeat, was to isolate Roman Dmitri from the rest of his troops and take him down at all costs. Whoosh. Rumble. The world warped around them. Dark mana burst from his body, engulfing the surrounding area in darkness, completely isolating the space so that the Umberton soldiers watching from the ramparts could not interfere. At the same time, Castro absorbed the dark mana around him. It coursed through his veins, destroying the natural limits on his innate energy. That wasn't all. Before Roman Dmitri could so much as blink, shadows appeared around him, reaching toward him with dark tendrils. Swish. Grab him. Hundreds of hands covered the space. As the shadow magic attempted to engulf Roman, he quickly evaded and slashed them down one by one. This ability was familiar to him. He had experienced this technique once before in Valhalla's territory, but the shadows were greater in both number and strength this time. Castro peered at Roman Dmitri with black eyes. I'm going to ensure you die here. Boom. Rumble. With a tremendous shockwave, Castro instantly closed the distance between them, attacking with a dark, surging energy. This time, the force behind his swing far surpassed that of a level 7 aura user. His aura didn't spill out of him as intensely as before, but instead condensed into black flames that tried furiously to swallow Roman Dmitri in their blaze. Boom. Rumble. Castro had forsaken his soul. The shadowy energy demanded his life as a price, and the dark mana required him to abandon his humanity. However, he had no regrets. The moment he was forced to accept that he could never defeat Roman Dmitri, he lost all reason to continue living as William Castro. Accepting the deal with the devil that Alexander had offered him, Castro, now filled to the brim with immense power, displayed a level of lethality completely different from before. Boom. Rumble. The world shook. After Castro's repeated onslaughts, the shadows seized on the opportunity to unleash their own mana as well. Whoosh. Swish. The dark mana lashed out in whip-like tendrils. Some took the form of hands, wrapping around Roman Dmitri's body, while others struck directly. They were all repelled by his quick reactions. However, more shadows constantly rose up to attack him whenever an opening appeared, and some of them targeted blind spots, throwing themselves into the tempest of his aura. Slash. Their bodies were torn apart, but that was all Castro needed. As Roman focused his attention on the shadows around him, Castro closed in, his eyes filled with an inhuman savagery. Boom. Rumble. It was a powerful strike. Without a doubt, it was the most threatening attack Roman had faced in his current lifetime. The shadow's follow-up attacks allowed him no respite either. Kronos' trap was an impressive one. To catch the big fish that was Roman Dmitri, the Kronos Empire had abandoned their pride and sacrificed the soul of Castro, its greatest swordsman. To them, if it meant killing him, it would all be worth it. As Castro's attack was deflected and he prepared to strike again, the look in Roman Dmitri's eyes changed. Divine Demon Sword Technique, Final Sequence, First Form. Flash. The air around them shifted as his mana intensified. The attack that had sliced through Castro's secret technique in an instant was once again unleashed with the intention of rendering Castro hopeless. However, boom. Clang. Instead of hopelessness, Castro's face filled with euphoria. He, if barely, had managed to block the same attack he hadn't even been able to see properly before, and he even withstood the shockwave of aura that followed. This was why Castro had sold his soul. He'd wanted enough power to face Roman Dmitri. In Roman's current life, not a single person had managed to withstand the final sequence of his special technique, yet Castro didn't stop at just blocking it. He charged forward. Rumble. Mana twisted and spiked around him, driven by a manic joy. Ha ha ha. Did you see? You're no longer invincible. In his current life, this was the first time. Even in Murim, those who could withstand the final sequence were rare. Castro had proven just how powerful dark magic could be. However, that was all that could be said about him. Roman's expression as he regarded Castro was one of cool indifference. So? There was a trap his opponents often fell into when facing the sword of the divine demon, namely that they had a tendency to celebrate like they already won just by managing to block it. They only succeeded at stopping one attack, yet they failed to consider what would happen next. A duel where lives were on the line didn't end with a single blow. In swordsmanship, being able to parry your opponent's blade only meant that you had met the basic skill requirement for facing them. In other words, the strike that Castro had blocked a few seconds ago was not some sort of desperate, last-ditch attack on Roman's part, but one of many that they were expected to exchange. Boom! His arm was forced back. After barely managing to block the first attack, Castro's eyes widened at the continuous, powerful bursts that followed. The shadows threw themselves forward to help him. Flash. Dozens of the shadows trying to protect Castro were instantly torn apart, and Roman Dmitri appeared right in front of him. Castro summoned all his strength. He gritted his teeth and blocked Roman Dmitri's blows as best he could, but with each successive impact, his eyes threatened to rattle out of his skull. Every attack defied reason. He was struggling just to block them, yet Roman Dmitri swung his sword like this was nothing. Roman Dmitri, no, Jung-Heek Beck, did not seek out opponents who could merely block his divine demon sword technique. That was the bare minimum. No, he sought a powerful opponent who could challenge him in a duel of hundreds of exchanges. Flash. Arg. An arm flew off. Flash. A leg was severed. Blood gushing from his wounds, Castro stared at Roman Dmitri in disbelief. Thud. He fell to the ground, the last of his strength gone. He had sold his soul and removed the limiters on his inherent energy, yet even with a foundation of a level 7 aura to build off of, all he could manage was a few brief exchanges with Roman Dmitri. He struggled to get up, but down an arm and a leg, he completely lost his balance. He fell face first onto the ground, but with great effort, he raised his head to look at Roman Dmitri. I told you. The eyes looking down on him were ice cold. Roman Dmitri showed no signs of being intimidated, no signs of fear. I have never met an opponent who could make me use my full power. Forget a wall to be climbed. What Castro faced in that moment was the sky, and above that, another sky. A being so above them all that no one would even dare to challenge it. That was the true nature of Roman Dmitri. As he was forced to accept reality, Castro began to laugh hysterically, his face devoid of all hope. He, ha ha ha. You really are a monster. So Roman Dmitri is indeed the continent's greatest swordsman. Whoosh. The darkness receded. The shadows scattered. On the ramparts, the soldiers let out shouts of astonishment. They had been bewildered by the sudden darkness, and although not much time had passed for them, the darkness lifted to reveal the pathetic sight of Castro kneeling at Roman's feet. They had no way of knowing what had happened. But what they did know was that Castro had failed to defeat Roman Dmitri, despite giving it his all. If I were to leave you alone, you would probably march straight to Kronos' capital and behead the emperor, said Castro. But what difference would that make? You and I both know the truth. The true power behind Kronos is not the emperor. That is why I, who should be protecting the emperor right now, left the imperial court to be here. It was a shocking statement. He was undermining the foundation of Kronos' reputation. As people looked on in confusion, Castro's eyes took on a deranged gleam. You have offended Alexander. He, like you, does not tolerate compromise. If he has decided to kill you and conquer the continent of Salamander, it is as good as done. Whoosh. His body began to dissipate. At the brink of death, Castro shouted, as if trying to leave behind some lingering mark on the world. He will descend upon this world and dispatch all of you insignificant fools who dare to resist him. Alexander himself will deliver judgment unto you. Behold. Feast your eyes on what you now face. While I fought here, Cairo Kingdom has fallen into the pit of despair, screaming in agony. He could not say anything more. With those last few words, his body completely dissipated like a cloud of smoke. However, he'd spoken the truth. At that very moment, while Roman Dmitri was busy dealing with Castro, a shadow of despair had indeed descended upon the western front of Cairo.